this is a quote from a blogger, The Love Life of an Asian Guy, who's fabulous and super funny. But he did a blog post probably a year ago, it may have been a little longer, on food. And I don't know his nationality. He just goes by Love Life of an Asian Guy. But he had done a post on the food that his family eats and how, as a youth, he felt very ashamed by it, right? His family ate weird food that his family didn't eat. He didn't like the way he smelled when he went to school from like his mom cooking these foods, that kind of stuff. But there was this quote in it. So it says, for people of color, food is complex. It's heartbreaking and it holds our family stories like a book holds recipes. For people of color, food is everything, right? And when I think about food and the importance of food, I do think it is everything, right? And with culture, when it comes to culture, like our culture is our land, our language, our spirituality, and the food we eat, right? Like that's what makes up a culture. And when we look at colonization and taking away culture, right, and dismantling culture, colonizers are very, very, very good at breaking those things down, right? We're going to make your spirituality illegal, right? We're going to take your children and send them to Catholic boarding schools. We're going to take you off of your land and put you somewhere else, right? We're going to beat you for speaking your language, right? Force you to speak English. And we're going to take you from your mothers and not let you breastfeed, right? We're going to take away your buffalo. We're going to take away your rights to fish or hunt, all of that, right? And that's how cultures die. That's, it's very systemic and it's very planned. And, a lot of times, like, I'll hear people say, like, oh, well, I don't think they meant to do it that way. And I absolutely call BS on that. I think it was absolutely planned. They knew everything they were doing. And were quite successful at it, right? We're quite successful at it. But food really is everything. And so many of our communities are really bringing back, our traditional foods. There's a lot of focus on the importance of hunting and gathering and fishing and, eating our rice and squash and corn or whatever your traditional foods are, right? And there's power with reclaiming that, yet we're not including breast milk in that, right? We're not including breast milk in that. I shared this story yesterday too of me at a first food conference, a native traditional first foods conference. My girl Roberta, who's holding her son Ukiah in the cradle board, Roberta is Shoshone, and she's the founder of the Oregon Intertribal Breastfeeding Coalition. Down in Oregon, so we're kind of sister states there, and we were tabling at this traditional foods conference, and I was away from my kiddo. She was a toddler at this point. It was my first overnight away from her, and I needed a place to pump, and so I went and asked the organizers. I was like, hey, can I pump somewhere? And she said, there's a bathroom down there, right? And I was just like, excuse me? Like, you're gonna tell me, a Native woman, to pump my milk in a bathroom? I was just like, I felt very bad for her because I ended up being probably a little meaner than I should have been. But I was super upset about it, right? I was really, and the irony did not escape me, right? That here I am at a traditional foods conference and I'm being told to pump my first food, my traditional food, right, in a bathroom. And I asked her, like, well, is there another room I can use? Do you guys have a hotel room that I can use? A lot of times at conferences, I go to breastfeeding conferences all over the country, and they just buy a room for the day, and moms can go there and pump, or they set up a curtain somewhere, and you can go and pump there. But anyway, she had said, no, you can use the bathroom or go to your car. right? And so I was like, okay, so the other picture is of me with my Indian stink eye pumping in my car. You know, and I'm in a city I don't live in. It's clearly dark, right? I'm in this like dark parking lot, right, pumping, and ended up taking a picture because of course I needed to rant about it on Facebook, and ended up putting it on Facebook and about, you know, the importance of including breastfeeding in our food sovereignty work. And, you know, typically in our among food sovereignty movements, when we talk about traditional foods, and they call them first foods, right? Our first foods, we have fish, game, squash, corn, rice, beans, and berries, I think, right? Like those are our first foods. And I'm like, those are nobody's first foods, right? Nobody should eat that until they're at least 6 months old, if not older, right? Like, so I have some beef sometimes with the food sovereignty movement because they're like co-opting our stuff, right? Like, no, breast milk is the one and only first food, right? There is no other first food. Okay, it's just breast milk and only breast milk. So, yeah, I took this picture, posted a nice little rant on Facebook, woke up the next morning to have it shared 10,000 times, and I was like, oh, like, so that happened. So then I, you know, called my husband and let him know that there is a picture of me pumping on Facebook, and it was apparently shared 10,000 times. So that happened. But anyways, it was awesome. But it really, you know, it helped, like, you know, then I definitely got some phone calls to come and talk places and whatever. But that, you know, really talking about breast milk as our first food, it should absolutely be integrated into our food programs at our tribes, and really not just integrated, it should be the foundation, right? It should be the foundation of all of our programs. It should be something that we're learning about. What breast milk does, because breast milk is awesome, and I know that some of you, you know, a lot of you know about breast milk and how great it is, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about breast milk. I also love this image, right? I make milk, what's your superpower? You may have seen that before, right? Because it really is a superpower. It's pretty, you know, pretty amazing that, like, we can make milk that is so perfect for our babies, right? And grow our babies, and nobody else can do that, right? No one else can do that. That's something I really like to tell young moms, especially teen moms, right? Who a lot of times grandma is going to be taking care of that baby. I have a lot of beef with the way we treat teen moms, especially that, you know, we don't give them maternity leave. We're like, get back to school, let's go, right? School, school, school. And forgetting that bonding and attaching and breastfeeding with their baby is really, really important. And they will pay for the consequences of not doing that, right? Long-term, like, there's long-term consequences to not doing that. Yes, she may graduate on time still, but, you know, her baby may be sick, right? May end up with diabetes or obesity. I mean, we never know these things, right? And so, but I really like, for a lot of moms, you know, young mothers, teen mamas, like, they're returning to school so early, and they're still young, and they have, you know, like, they want to go and do things, and just because they're moms, and even for adults, right? Like, we don't, just because we're moms, we don't want to not do anything anymore, right? Like, we still want to go out, we still want to do things, and so it can be really neat for teen moms to learn that, like, and be told that you're the only one that can breastfeed your baby. You're the only one that can do this, right? Your baby will never question who their mother is, right? Or who is to take care of them, right? You can be at school all day long, right? And for those of you that have breastfed and worked, right? I swear, like, my child was like a dog, you know, like how dogs, like, sense your car turning down the street, and they're, like, at the door ready for you to, you know, like, ready for you to walk in the door, and they're so excited. Like, my daughter was like that with, like, me getting home. I swear she could, like, hear my car, like, from a block away, and I'd walk in the door, and she's just, like, sitting on the couch, right? Like, just, let's, come on, like, come and sit with me, let's nurse, right? Let's connect from our day away from each other. It's a really important time, right? We need to connect. I need to tell you what happened, right? Even if it's just by making eye contact, right? Like, I want to tell you about my day. So yeah, breast milk's awesome. All right. So we have a lot of things why, I mean, breast milk's so important for so many reasons, and there's over 100,000 ingredients in breast milk, versus formula has about 40, right? 40 or so. And so it really doesn't even compare. We don't even know what most of the ingredients in breast milk do, what their purpose is. And so I think we'll never understand the true reasons, all the reasons why breast milk is so important. I also really, language I think is really important in the way we talk about breastfeeding. I rarely talk about the benefits of breastfeeding. I believe that there are actually no benefits of breastfeeding. There's only risk to not breastfeeding, right? Breast milk is our biological norm. It is our standard. Everything should be compared to it, right? But when we talk about the benefits of breastfeeding, we're normalizing formula as the standard, right? So formula is normal, and then anything above and beyond that is extra, okay? Does that make sense? How like that language can kind of like it really gives people the idea that formula is, it's fine, it's normal, it's great, right? But formula grows babies, that's all it does. It does nothing else. It provides fat and calories, right? Nothing else, okay? So it grows babies, which is awesome, right? We need babies. The number one rule is always feed the baby, always, right? We're always gonna feed the baby, so there's no reason, like absolutely we need to feed our babies. But it offers no benefits beyond that, right? No benefits beyond growing our babies. Where breast milk, the importance of breast milk is unheard. I mean, we just like can't even we're just scratching the surface, right? I think of breast milk as like an iceberg, right? And we just have like that little tip of the stuff that we know and we can see, and there's just this huge vast of ice underneath the surface that we'll just maybe never even understand, right? But specifically for Native communities, when we talk about breast milk, this is the other thing too that I found, is that because the industry, like breast milk as a whole, I hate to call it an industry, but the work of breastfeeding advocates, all of that kind of stuff, really does, because it has been driven mostly by upper middle class white women, right? They typically speak to and message upper middle class white women, right? Does that make sense, kind of what they're doing? Which is fine, right? It's fine. But when we look at the numbers over the last 50 years, and really the last 20 is where we've seen a real resurgence in breastfeeding, the only community that has really reaped benefits and seen an increase is among upper middle class white women, right? Their rates are going up. And they're going up pretty high, right? They have great initiation rates, right? In some places it's over 9 out of 10 are choosing to breastfeed, which is awesome, right? Because the messaging has been very geared toward them, right? The pictures that we see of women breastfeeding are pictures of white women, right? Very like ethereal too, right? They look like angels, right? They like are always wearing white and always like glowing, like glowing blonde hair and beautiful makeup, like these kind of images that are just like, nobody looks like that, right? Like no one looks like that when they're breastfeeding. And so it really puts it on this pedestal that is fairly unattainable, right? Like then it's like, okay, so now I'm breastfeeding, but I look like a disheveled mess, right? And like it's just, I say this all the time. I serve families mostly in South Seattle, and the Native families all over the state, but I'll see moms, and now I've worked with so many moms that I don't know everyone anymore, right? Like I don't recognize them, and I'll often joke, like someone will come up to me and they're like all dressed cute and have makeup on and their hair is done and their baby's like in their carrier and they're like, hi, it's so good to see you, she's doing so great. And I like have no recollection of ever working with them. And I'm like, if people would just like walk around like crying with messed up hair and like their boobs hanging out, then I'd maybe be able to recognize them, right? But it's like, because that's the reality, right? Like that's the reality. I call the postpartum period is very wet, I tell moms, right? I'm like, if liquid can come out of you, it will come out, right? It is like crying and sweating and bleeding and peeing and like leaking, and it's just everywhere. Like it's everywhere. It's not a glamorous time. And so these breastfeeding images that just show these like beautiful women like breastfeeding on a cloud, like that's just not the reality. And so, you know, with the imagery that we're getting of breastfeeding and the messaging, you know, it's talking about ear infections and IQ and, you know, that kind of, and like that stuff's important, right? Like that's fine. But that doesn't necessarily speak to our communities, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I've never met a like native mom that's walking around is like, yeah, you know, my son, he's getting 3 extra IQ points because I'm breastfeeding, right? Or like, I'm breastfeeding because I really hate ear infections. You know, like these are not things that are like, we're talking life and death, right? It's life and death for our communities. And we do need to talk about it that way, right? We need to talk about diabetes and the epidemic of diabetes in our communities. We have some tribes with 60% of their adult population has diabetes, right? Like 60% is crazy. That's huge, right? 33% of Native people have diabetes, right? This is an epidemic. And for breast milk, like we need to be talking about those things, right? We need to be talking about things that are impacting all of us, right? We've all been impacted by diabetes, right? We all know somebody that's having a hard time, you know, with that illness. We saw Abra has type 1 diabetes. You know, it's the leading cause of death among Native people. And so these are the things that are important and kind of the messaging I think we really need to get across to our communities, that this is life and death. It's not about ear infections. It's not about, you know, oh, you'll get a little bit more sleep and you'll lose some weight. And, you know, and I think like even I love my digital story, but like you can tell that like my language and things have evolved since then, right? That was 5 years ago. And I was talking about IQ and losing weight and, you know, that kind of stuff, because it was important. And that's the education I had gotten because I had been trained by mostly upper middle class white women, right? And that was the information I got there, because when I Googled it, there was nothing, right? There was nothing specifically for Native communities. And so it's taken even me some time to kind of get to this point in the way we talk about breastfeeding. So for SIDS, I think this is huge, right? And I have a big beef with the SIDS community for really downplaying the importance of breastfeeding, you know, in this. Yes, back to sleep is huge, right? And safe sleep is huge. And the back to sleep campaign was saved who knows how many lives, right? Thousands upon thousands of lives. They saw a reduction of 80% of SIDS-related deaths when they started the Back to Sleep campaign, right? So that's amazing. It really is amazing. And now we still have this disparity though, right? We still have more Native babies, more Black babies dying of SIDS than white babies. And, you know, we've got to look at why that is. And with the focus on sleep still, I feel we're really missing the boat, right? If we're just focusing on sleep, because there's lots of reasons why a baby might need to sleep with their family, right? And when we talk to women of color, especially about why they sleep with their baby, you know, things that they talk about is like, well, the only other room faces the street and there's a shooting all the time, and so I don't want anyone sleeping in that room, so baby needs to be by me, right? Or it's that they live in a house with, you know, multiple family members, and one of the family members is their uncle who sexually abused them when they were little, right? So they're not going to leave their baby alone in a room, you know, that kind of, like, these are the reasons why a lot of our families are sleeping with their babies, right? And then there's also costs involved. Can they afford a crib? Can they afford to have their own space? You know, that kind of stuff. A lot of our families are couch surfing. They're homeless. They're, you know, sleeping in places. And so, you know, safe sleep is absolutely important, but we also have to recognize that 90% of families do sleep with their babies, and we have to talk about mitigating that risk, right? It's that accidentally falling asleep is really, really dangerous. Sorry, little little sidetrack there on my SIDS rant, but you know, so for SIDS with breastfeeding, recent studies show that there's a 50 to 70% increased risk of SIDS when we don't breastfeed, right? Again, like, notice the language, right? When babies are not breastfed, there's an increased risk of 50 to 70% of SIDS, right? We're not saying that there's a reduced risk of SIDS when a baby breastfeeds, right? Because we shouldn't have this many babies dying of SIDS. Of course, babies are, you know, unfortunately, like, there will always be babies that die, you know, and there will be breastfed babies that die, like that. It's not to say it's going to eliminate it, but this is a huge percentage, right? And this is important, and we need to address it. And when we're looking at communities like the Native community, the Black community, with such low breastfeeding rates, to not talk about the importance of breastfeeding when it comes to SIDS, like in reduction of SIDS, really does a disservice, and it quite literally kills people, right? And we will lose lives because of it if we don't make this a very, very, very important part of our messaging and public health messaging. Yeah. So one, typically babies that are breastfed sleep near with their mother, right? So they're sleeping near them, especially at night, right? Because that's, like, if you've been a breastfeeding mom, and like that waking up to breastfeed is really, really hard. So so the close sleeping near mother is really important. We find breastfed babies do that. Also, because breast milk is so perfect and so easily digestible, right? Babies do wake up often when they are breastfed, right? They wake up more often than formula-fed babies because they're supposed to, right? It is not normal for babies to be sleeping for 4, 5, 6 hours in the first, like, I'd say 3 months of their life. Like, it's something that we really, for a breastfed baby, if they do it on their own, that's one thing, but like, it makes me very nervous to hear of babies sleeping that long. We do want them waking up. We do want them waking up and kind of regulating and be like, oh yeah, breathe, right? Come to mom's breast, because that skin to skin, the benefits of skin to skin, like, last as long as they do it, right? Like, it's not just important for in the hospital. When a 3-month-old, when a 6-month-old, shoot, when adults are skin to skin with someone, like, we feel good, right? Like, we feel loved and warm and, you know, like, all of that, right? And comforted, and our heart rates. I mean, I think about, like, even I have a really hard time sleeping, and I'll be laying in bed and, you know, next to my husband and hearing him breathe, and then I find, like, I'm breathing at the same speed he is, right? And I'm not even doing it on purpose. It's just what we do when we are with someone close, right? So for babies, you know, that waking up often, going skin to skin to breastfeed helps, you know, kind of remind them to keep breathing, you know, regulate that temperature. We also see that SIDS is very much linked to respiratory conditions, right? And we know that when babies are breastfed, that they have much lower incidence of respiratory infections. And if they do get them, they tend to not be as worse or severe, and they tend to get better faster. And this is where things get controversial. So definitely co-sleeping, right, which is sleeping near our baby. It doesn't necessarily mean bed sharing, okay? So co-sleeping is, you know, baby is sleeping near us within an arm's reach or in the same room, right? And the American Academy of Pediatrics just changed their recommendations that babies sleep in the same room as their parents for a year, right? For 1 year. It used to be 6 months, now it's a year. And again, these are just recommendations. Some things work for some families and some things don't, and we have to meet every family where they're at, right? I've definitely met with families that are so sleep deprived, are having such challenges, and that like that baby's got to go, right? That baby's got to go somewhere else, and that's fine to do. As far as bed sharing goes, you know, I think it's trickier. I am like, in full disclosure, was absolutely a bed sharer. I did not plan on bed sharing at all, but I had major abdominal surgery and just rolling over was pretty difficult for me to do, right? And so it just kind of, I learned pretty quick that baby was gonna sleep with me, and ended up sleeping with both my girls for quite a long time, basically until they asked for their own room, which they did, right? When they were 5 and 3, they wanted their own rooms. And so I recognize I have bias there, you know, as a bed share, an accidental bed sharer. Didn't plan on it, but then, you know, I slept really well, like baby slept really well. And I often talk about too, like with breastfeeding moms, when we sleep near our baby, I mean, I could literally hear my baby's, it sounded like Velcro to me, like her eyelashes like separate when she opened her eyes in the middle of the night. Like it was as loud as Velcro to me. It would wake me up from my sleep. Like that's how connected we were, right? It was just like her eyes opened and I would like hear them open, and then it just, okay, put you to breast, like, and then go back to sleep. And so there is that, you know, strong connection, and there's not a single incident that I know of. Something may have happened more recently of a breastfeeding mother who is not on drugs or alcohol, right, accidentally smother her baby, right? It is, when it does happen, substances may be involved, or it's someone else other than the mother, right? A sibling, a father, a cousin, a grandparent, you know, something else going on. But I do think, you know, with bed sharing, again, 90% of families do it at some point, right? 90%. And so I equate kind of this like no bed sharing education is like similar to abstinence only education, right? That like we're really doing a disservice if we're not talking about mitigating risk, you know? So if this happens, if you find that you're sleeping with your baby, or if you do this, we need to talk about how to do it safely, or as safe as possible, right? Making sure there are no pillows near your baby, making sure there are no blankets, right? Like maybe talking to mom about sleeping in a button-down flannel shirt so she can stay warm, right? Instead of having blankets pulled up. The correct positioning, right, for moms, like side lying, that kind of stuff. We do need to talk about it, because most families are going to do it at some point, right? And again, coming from a public health perspective, like we need to recognize that. And someday I'm sure this, you know, it'll come out, like I do think we need to recognize, like with how important breastfeeding is, and how important like the night nursing and bed sharing often is for the success of breastfeeding, right? And I'm not sure that you know, if a baby was not breastfed versus a baby who, you know, just doesn't, or sleeps with their mom, like what the difference is in life saved for that. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm making any sense in how I'm thinking, but yeah, so the bed sharing piece is complicated. I think it's complicated. Yeah, and we know that the bed sharing very much can be very dangerous, right? It can be dangerous, but most people are gonna do it. And it is pretty important for breastfeeding. And so for those of you that don't know James McKenna, turns out he was in Wisconsin earlier this year. So he's out of Notre Dame, and he runs the Mother Baby Sleep Center. And he's spent 2 decades studying the sleep of mothers, specifically breastfeeding mothers and babies, and just, bulk of the information and research he has, you know, I get from him, you know, and have followed him for a long time. So yeah, he has some great stuff there. There's another Kathleen Kendall Tackett calls it breast sleeping, right? And that like when we breast sleep, that's different, you know, than if we aren't a breastfeeding parent and sleeping with our babies or something like that. So I love that. I love that image too of breast sleeping.